The history of House Frey. 600 years ago, a petty lord made a decision that would turn his family into the most hated name in Westeros. What started as a simple wooden bridge became a weapon of mass destruction that would ultimately claim the lives of kings, destroy ancient bloodlines, and curse an entire house to live as outcasts in their own kingdom. The Lords of the Crossing thought they were playing the Game of Thrones, but they were actually digging their own graves, one toll at a time. Most people think they know House Frey's story. They remember the Red Wedding, the broken oaths, the betrayal that shocked even the most cynical players in King's Landing. But the truth is far darker and more twisted than anyone realizes. The massacre at the Twins wasn't the beginning of their fall from grace. It was the inevitable conclusion of a 6th century descent into moral bankruptcy that started the moment they decided to charge travelers for safe passage across their bridge. You see, House Frey didn't become monsters overnight. They were created by a system that rejected them, shaped by generations of humiliation, and molded by the constant reminder that no amount of gold could buy them the one thing they desperately craved. The very lords who would later condemn them for breaking guest right were the same ones who had spent centuries treating them like glorified toll collectors rather than true nobility. What if the Red Wedding wasn't an act of pure evil, but the predictable result of centuries of systematic exclusion? What if Walder Frey wasn't born a villain, but was manufactured by a society that promised acceptance, but delivered only contempt? The uncomfortable truth about House Frey is that their story isn't really about them at all. It's about what happens when an entire social system creates its own monsters and then acts surprised when those monsters finally bite back. Every toll they collected was a reminder of their place in the hierarchy. Every marriage proposal, rejected by prouder houses, was another nail in the coffin of their humanity. Every time they were called late to battles they had helped win was another step toward the moment when they would decide that honor was a luxury they could no longer afford. The real tragedy of House Frey isn't that they became oath breakers and murderers. The real tragedy is that they were probably the most honest house in all of Westeros. While other noble families pretended their power came from divine right or ancient honor, the Freys admitted what everyone knew, but no one would say out loud. In the Game of Thrones, money talks louder than honor, pragmatism trumps loyalty, and survival matters more than reputation. They were willing to say what others only whispered. They were willing to do what others only dreamed of doing. And for that honesty, for that brutal acknowledgement of how the world really works, they became the scapegoats for an entire system built on hypocrisy and lies. This is the story of how a house that should have been celebrated for their entrepreneurial spirit instead became the perfect villains for a kingdom that needed someone to blame for its own moral failures. This is the story of how the crossing that made them rich also became the bridge that led them straight to damnation. The rise of the toll collectors. 600 years ago, when dragons had not yet graced the skies of Westeros, a petty lord with ambitions far greater than his station received a grant of land that would change the course of history. The narrowest crossing of the Green Fork River in the northern Riverlands, a strategic bottleneck that most lords would have seen as merely another patch of muddy ground. But this lord, bearing the name Frey, saw something different. He saw opportunity. The Green Fork carved its way through the landscape like a scar, wide and treacherous, separating the eastern and western shores with waters that claimed the lives of countless travelers who dared attempt the crossing. For generations, merchants, nobles, and common folk alike had no choice but to travel weeks out of their way, journeying south to the inn at the crossroads or north to the neck, where ancient causeways offered the only safe passage. The first Lord Frey understood the power of necessity. While other houses built their wealth on fertile lands and ancient bloodlines, he constructed something far more valuable, a monopoly. His initial bridge was nothing more than a rickety wooden structure, barely wide enough for a single cart, swaying dangerously in the river winds. Yet even this humble beginning represented the future of House Frey. The construction was a generational project. The Green Fork fought back against every timber driven into its bed, every stone laid upon its banks. 3 generations of Freys poured their blood, sweat, and treasury into creating not just a bridge, but a fortress. The wooden planks gave way to solid stone. The simple crossing became 2 mighty towers, rising from opposite banks like stone guardians, each a mirror image of the other. These towers would become known as the Twins, and their lord would earn the title that would define his house for centuries to come. Lord of the Crossing. But titles meant nothing without the wealth to back them. And wealth came from the endless stream of travelers who discovered that crossing the Green Fork now came with a price. The Freys did not charge a simple toll. They perfected the art of extraction, reading each traveler's desperation, measuring their urgency, calculating exactly how much they could bear before turning away. A merchant with spoiling goods paid more than a leisurely noble. A king's messenger racing with urgent news found his purse significantly lighter after crossing. The phrase, "paying the Frey toll," became synonymous with extortion throughout the 7 kingdoms. Yet for all their wealth, respect remained elusive. The established houses of the Riverlands watched with barely concealed disdain as these upstarts accumulated power through what they saw as glorified merchant activities. Noble houses were expected to gain influence through conquest or strategic marriages, not by charging fees like common traders. The Freys had money, but they lacked the one thing gold could not buy: acceptance. This rejection stung deeper because of House Frey's origins. When the first Lord Frey received his grant, the Riverlands were not ruled by river lords at all. Instead, they bowed to the Storm Kings of House Durandon, who had conquered the region a century earlier from their seat at Storm's End. The established river lords suspected, with good reason, that the Freys owed their position not to merit or local support, but to the favor of foreign conquerors. The possibility that the original Lord Frey might have been a Stormlander himself, planted by his king to secure a vital crossing, made the situation even more galling to the native lords. Whether Frey was an up-jumped riverman or a foreign implant, his descendants would carry the stain of illegitimacy for generations to come. But House Frey possessed something their critics lacked: adaptability. While ancient houses clung to tradition and honor, the Freys watched the political winds with the keen eye of merchants evaluating market trends. They understood that power in Westeros was fluid, that yesterday's king could become tomorrow's corpse, and that survival depended not on loyalty to principle, but on recognizing where true power lay. This pragmatic approach served them well when rebellions began to shake the Riverlands. Nearly every generation saw uprisings against the Storm Kings, led by proud houses with ancient names and ancestral grievances. Yet House Frey never appeared among the rebel banners. They had prospered under Storm King rule, and they saw no reason to bite the hand that fed them. Their loyalty was tested when the Storm Kings finally lost their grip on the Riverlands after 3 centuries of rule. The Riverlords, after generations of failed rebellions, finally found success through an unlikely alliance with the Ironborn of the Iron Islands. Together, they drove out the Stormlords. But victory came with a price. King Harwin Hoare of the Iron Islands had not helped the Riverlords out of kindness. He intended to rule them himself. The kingdom of isles and rivers that emerged was a harsh realm, where the Ironborn encouraged their vassals to wage war upon each other, believing that constant conflict would prevent any unified resistance to their rule. For House Frey, accustomed to the profits of peace, this was a disaster. Safe roads meant steady toll revenue. War meant empty coffers and burning bridges. When Aegon the Conqueror arrived with his dragons, the Freys saw their chance for redemption. They joined House Tully and the other river lords in rising against King Harren the Black, providing men and resources for the campaign that would end with Harrenhal's destruction and Harren's death in the flames of Balerion the Black Dread. For perhaps the first time in their history, the Freys shed blood alongside their fellow river lords for a common cause. They marched beneath the same banners, faced the same enemies, and celebrated the same victory. It was a moment of unity that might have earned them the acceptance they had long sought. But acceptance once lost is not easily regained. The other houses acknowledged Frey contributions, but did not forget Frey origins. They were useful allies, wealthy neighbors, but they would never be equals. The toll collectors had helped win a kingdom, but they remained, in the eyes of many, exactly what they had always been: upstart merchants with pretensions above their station. Dragons, dancing, and dangerous games. The reign of the Targaryens brought unprecedented prosperity to House Frey. Under the king's peace, trade flourished across the Seven Kingdoms, and the twins became one of the busiest crossings in Westeros. Gold flowed into Frey coffers like water through their bridges' arches, but with wealth came temptation, and the Freys had never been able to resist a profitable gamble. When King Aenys died and his half-brother Maegor the Cruel usurped the throne from the rightful heirs, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaena, most lords recognized the writing on the wall. Maegor commanded Balerion the Black Dread and had his formidable mother Visenya at his side, mounted on Vhagar. The smart money backed the usurper. But House Frey had never been content with safe bets when bigger rewards beckoned. They threw their support behind Prince Aegon and his dragon Quicksilver, calculating that backing the rightful heir might earn them the same rewards that House Tully had received for being first to join Aegon the Conqueror against King Harren. It was a reasonable gamble that ended in catastrophe when Maegor and Balerion killed both prince and dragon above the god's eye. The defeat should have meant ruin for House Frey, but their accumulated wealth proved more valuable than honor or loyalty. Whatever penalty King Maegor might have imposed was apparently offset by the Freys' ability to open their treasury to the crown. Once again, gold had purchased survival where sword and shield had failed. This pattern of opportunistic rebellion would define House Frey for generations. They possessed the resources to back risky ventures and the pragmatism to minimize consequences when those ventures failed. It was a dangerous game, but one that occasionally paid extraordinary dividends. The most famous example came during the Dance of the Dragons, when a younger son named Walder Frey made a play that seemed destined for mockery. In the year 112 AC, Princess Rhaenyra was making a royal progress through the Riverlands when this minor Frey, not even heir to the twins, boldly requested her hand in marriage. The court erupted in laughter, a toll collector's son proposing to the Princess of Dragonstone. The audacity earned him the nickname Fool Frey throughout the Seven Kingdoms. But Walder Frey proved that fools sometimes become prophets. Despite his low position in the succession, he eventually inherited the twins and married Lady Sabitha Vipren, a woman whose ambition matched his own. When the Dance of the Dragons erupted, splitting the realm between the Blacks and Greens, Forrest chose Princess Rhaenyra's side, the same woman who had once refused his marriage proposal. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Fool Frey now commanded one of the most strategic positions in the realm, and his support would prove crucial to the Black cause. He joined Prince Daemon Targaryen in taking Stonehenge from House Bracken, welcomed Lord Roderick Dustin and his Winter Wolves as they emerged from the Neck, and marched with them to the God's Eye, where they would face a Lannister host. The Battle of the Lakeshore, known grimly as the fish feed for the feast it provided to the lake's inhabitants, saw Walder Frey die as he had lived, gambling everything on a single decisive moment. His forces emerged victorious, but victory came at the ultimate personal cost. The fool Frey had proven his worth with his life, leaving behind a young son and a widow who would prove even more formidable than her late husband. Lady Sabitha Frey was not content to serve merely as regent for her young son. She embodied every quality that made House Frey both successful and despised: cunning, ambition, and an absolute willingness to seize any opportunity that presented itself. When Harrenhal stood empty after Prince Aemon's massacre of House Strong, Sabitha saw not a cursed ruin, but the largest castle in Westeros, ripe for claiming. Her attempt to seize Harrenhal nearly ended in disaster when Prince Aemon returned with Vhagar, turning the great castle into a furnace of dragon flame. Sabitha survived only by hiding in a privy, an ignoble refuge that saved her life, but did nothing for her dignity. The experience taught her the limits of ambition, but did not cure her of it entirely. Throughout the remainder of the dance, Lady Sabitha proved herself one of the most capable military commanders in the Riverlands. She led Frey forces at the Second Battle of Tumbleton and the final Battle of the King's Road, and was among the army of Riverlords who marched unopposed into King's Landing when the war finally ended. Despite her proven competence and the crucial role House Frey had played in securing victory for the Blacks, Sabitha was overlooked when regents were chosen for the young King Aegon III. The slight might have rankled another noble, but Sabitha had more practical concerns. The realm was exhausted by war, and the Riverlands in particular had suffered massive casualties among its fighting men. Her solution was characteristically innovative and pragmatic. Working alongside Black Ailey Blackwood, with whom she shared more than just political alliance, if the whispered rumors of shared tents were true, Sabitha organized widow fairs at the Twins. These events brought together thousands of widowed Riverlands women with unmarried northern soldiers who had chosen to remain in the south rather than return to their winter-bound homes. The widow fairs were more than mere matchmaking events. They represented a form of cultural diplomacy that would have consequences lasting centuries. The marriages forged between northern men and Riverlands women created bonds of kinship that transcended traditional regional boundaries. Many Riverlands houses would later claim northern heritage through these unions, a connection that would prove crucial when Robb Stark proclaimed his kingdom of the North and Rivers. The irony was exquisite. House Frey, long excluded from the established networks of noble marriage, had become the architect of a new form of alliance that bound two entire regions together. The toll collectors had evolved into marriage brokers, and their success in this venture earned them more genuine respect than centuries of accumulated wealth had managed to achieve. For several generations following the dance, House Frey maintained a relatively low profile. They continued to collect their tolls, accumulate their wealth, and watch the political currents with their characteristic attention to opportunity. But peace, however profitable, offered fewer chances for dramatic advancement than the chaos of civil war. The Freys' next major appearance in history came during the events chronicled in The Mystery Night, one of the Dunk and Egg tales. In the year 212 AC, Lord Butterwell hosted a tournament at Whitewalls to celebrate his marriage to a young Lady Frey. The tournament was a trap, designed to provide cover for the Second Blackfire Rebellion by crowning Daemon II Blackfire as champion and using his victory to attract supporters to his cause. The bride's presence at Whitewalls represented a new phase in Frey matrimonial strategy. House Butterwell, like House Frey, was viewed with disdain by the older nobility as merchants pretending to aristocracy. Bloodraven himself dismissed the union as a marriage between cattle thieves and toll collectors, but such marriages made perfect strategic sense for houses excluded from more prestigious alliances. More significantly, Lord Frey brought his young son and heir to the tournament, a 4-year-old boy described unflatteringly as chinless and snotty-nosed. This child, was Walder Frey, future Lord of the Twins and orchestrator of the Red Wedding. Even at 4 years old, he was learning the family business of reading political winds and choosing profitable sides. When the tournament conspiracy began to unravel, the Freys initially fled with the other plotters. But when Bloodraven's men brought them back, their fate diverged dramatically from their allies. While Lord Butterwell was stripped of 9/10 of his wealth and saw White Walls razed to the ground, Lord Frey sat comfortably with a cup of wine, apparently unpunished for his role in the plot. The implication was clear. House Frey had betrayed their fellow conspirators in exchange for clemency. They had backed the rebel cause only to switch sides when capture seemed inevitable, selling out their allies to purchase their own survival. It was exactly the sort of calculated betrayal that would define Walder Frey's approach to politics decades later, and it established a pattern that would echo through the generations. By the end of the Targaryen era, House Frey had perfected their reputation as unreliable allies and dangerous enemies. They possessed the wealth to make their support valuable and the pragmatism to abandon any cause when the odds turned against them. Other houses might despise them, but they could not ignore them, the late Lord and the price of ambition. When Robert Baratheon's hammer shattered Prince Rhaegar's chest at the Trident, House Frey was notably absent from the field. While other Riverlands houses chose sides in the rebellion that would topple the Targaryen dynasty, the Freys waited. They watched. They calculated. And when the outcome became clear, they emerged to support the winning side, claiming they had been loyal to House Tully all along. This pattern of strategic delay would define Walder Frey's long reign as Lord of the Twins. The snotty-nosed boy who had witnessed the White Walls conspiracy had grown into a bitter old man who viewed every slight, real or imagined, as a debt to be collected with interest. By the time of Robert's rebellion, he had already earned the nickname the late Lord Frey for his habit of arriving to battles just after they had been decided. The moniker stung because it contained more than a grain of truth. Walder had inherited not just his ancestors' pragmatism, but their exclusion from the inner circles of Westerosi nobility. Despite 6 centuries of accumulated wealth and power, House Frey remained outsiders looking in. They could buy their way into conflicts, but they could never buy their way into genuine acceptance. This exclusion bred resentment that curdled over decades into something darker. Where earlier Freys had been content to profit from their position, Walder nursed grievances like a merchant counting coins, every marriage proposal rejected by more established houses, every slight from prouder lords, every reminder of his family's merchant origins was catalogued and remembered. The Frey family tree had grown into a sprawling maze of legitimate children, bastards and grandchildren, each representing both an asset and a liability. Walder had married 8 times and produced dozens of offspring, but quantity could not compensate for quality when it came to marriage alliances. The great houses of Westeros still preferred to marry among themselves, leaving the Freys to arrange matches with lesser nobility or ambitious merchants seeking to buy their way into the aristocracy. When the War of the Five Kings erupted, Walder Frey found himself presented with the opportunity his ancestors had always sought, the chance to be truly necessary rather than merely useful. King Robb Stark needed to cross the Trident to rescue his father, and time was of the essence. For once, the Freys held all the cards in a negotiation that would determine the fate of kingdoms. The price Walder extracted was unprecedented in Frey history. Not gold, not land, but royal blood itself. Robb Stark would marry one of Walder's daughters or granddaughters, and Arya Stark would wed another Frey heir. The toll collectors would finally join the nobility not as servants or allies, but as family to kings. It should have been the culmination of 6 centuries of ambition. House Frey would finally achieve the acceptance that had been denied to them since their founding. But respect earned through extortion is no respect at all, and Walder's triumph contained the seeds of his family's destruction. When Robb Stark broke his marriage pact to wed Jane Westerling for love, he committed more than a breach of contract. He delivered the final, unforgivable insult to a man who had spent his entire life collecting slights like a miser hoarding copper. The late Lord Frey had been made a fool, his family's honor impugned before all the Seven Kingdoms. The Red Wedding was not merely revenge, it was a statement. House Frey would demonstrate that honor and oaths meant nothing when weighed against practical power. They would show the proud lords of Westeros that their ancient bloodlines could be extinguished as easily as snuffing out candles. But vengeance came with a price that Walder Frey, in his fury, had failed to calculate. The massacre at the Twins didn't elevate House Frey to the ranks of the great houses. It marked them for extinction. They had broken the most sacred law of hospitality, violated guest right itself, and earned the hatred not just of their enemies, but of anyone who valued honor over expediency. The aftermath proved that some victories are indistinguishable from defeat. House Frey had helped destroy the Kingdom of the North and rivers, but they found themselves ruling over ashes. Their new allies, the Boltons, regarded them with barely concealed contempt. Their old neighbors in the Riverlands saw them as oathbreakers and murderers. Even their own people began to whisper about curses and divine justice. The deaths began almost immediately. Lord Walder's heir, Stevron, died of wounds suffered in battle. Merritt Fry was found hanged by outlaws. Others met violent ends in the north, where Frey names had become synonymous with treachery. The family that had once seemed blessed with an almost supernatural ability to survive political upheavals suddenly found themselves hunted like common criminals. In the north, Frey men sent to garrison conquered castles discovered that their name had become a death sentence. The mountain clans remembered the Red Wedding, and they exacted their own form of justice on any Frey foolish enough to venture beyond the safety of the Twins. 5 members of the family died in the north alone, their deaths serving as bloody reminders that some betrayals echo through generations. The surviving Freys found themselves trapped in a cage of their own making. They had aligned themselves with House Bolton, but their new allies were already planning to dispose of their inconvenient partners. They held valuable lands and commanded significant resources, but they commanded no respect and inspired no loyalty. They were wealthy, powerful, and absolutely alone. The great irony of House Frey's story was that their ultimate success had become their ultimate failure. They had finally achieved everything their ancestors had dreamed of. They were feared, wealthy, and politically important. But fear without respect is tyranny, wealth without honor is meaningless, and political importance without allies is vulnerability. 600 years of careful opportunism had created a house that could navigate any political crisis except the one of their own making. They had always been outsiders, but they had been useful outsiders. Now they were simply pariahs, wealthy enough to be worth killing, but friendless enough to make killing them safe. The future of House Frey remained unwritten, but the patterns of history suggested few happy endings for those who broke faith as spectacularly as they had at the Red Wedding. They had gained a king's ransom in short-term advantage, but had paid with their long-term survival. The toll collectors had finally collected a debt too large for even their considerable wealth to cover. As winter approached Westeros, House Frey faced the same choice that had confronted their ancestors for 6 centuries: adapt or perish. But this time, the political winds they had always read so carefully were howling with the voices of the dead, and no amount of gold could purchase redemption for crimes committed against the sacred laws of hospitality and honor. The bridge still stood, the tolls still flowed, but the house that had built its fortune on knowing the price of everything had finally discovered the cost of their own souls. In the end, House Frey had proven that some crossings exact a toll that no traveler can afford to pay, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The late Lord Frey had lived long enough to see his family's greatest triumph transform into their most catastrophic defeat. And the question that haunted the twins was whether the house that had survived 6 centuries of political upheaval could survive the consequences of their own success.